This is E.T. A favorite avocation among boxing fans is pitting together fighters of different eras, or maybe the same era, who for various reasons never adjudicated that question of which one in his prime would be victorious. And among the most hotly debated of these would-be fights was and continues to be Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, heavyweight champion from, I think it was 1908 to 1915, versus Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh Mauler. He was champion from 1919 to 1926. Partisans tend to argue the merits of each man based more, or at least to a greater extent, on factors other than the respective talents of each man. To put it simply, the fans project victory upon the one with whom they share DNA. Whatever. In the end, such verbal jousting is all academic in most cases. Or wait a minute, is it? Could it be that Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey did, in fact, meet in the ring? Supposedly, says rumor, in a December 1921 private encounter, financed by very deep-pocketed gamblers. It took place, it is said, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. And such has been, and continues to be, simply a rumor. Well, let's take a look at that year, 1921. It was as strange a year as 2021 projects to be. Back then, World War I, which ended in November of 1918, would be immediately followed by a struggling economy, a fear of a communist takeover of the government, and a worldwide flu epidemic that killed, depending on whom you read, between 17 and 100 million people. The fact is, nobody has more than a vague estimate of the real numbers. Does that sound familiar? Also, there was prohibition. That came via constitutional amendment, and for a decade, it helped usher in law-breaking and organized crime and a lot of promiscuity. And Americans after the war, who in 1910 were so offended that we had a black heavyweight champion, that they rioted and pillaged for weeks, had, unknown to them, recently elected as President Warren G. Harding, who may well have been the nation's first African American to hold that office. You don't believe that, do you? Well, that is the thesis of the book, The Shadow of Blooming Grove. It's a tome of a book written by a reputable historian, Francis Russell. It's in this context that Johnson and Dempsey really may have fought, but without anybody, aside from the participants and a small group of rich gamblers, having seen or even heard of it. The exact date of the alleged encounter is thought to be December 10 of 1921. At that time, Jack Dempsey held the title. Now here's the story. Sometime after 1995, that's the year that eBay began, a partial copy of a newspaper, the Brooklyn Eagle, dated December 11, 1921, was, according to one rumor, apparently, notice that weasel word, apparently sold on that site. It was an account of that private affair between the two Jacks, Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey. Fight had been rumored since the 1920s. And it's also a fact that in 1985, a magazine called Fight Beat, edited by a reputable guy, Lou Eskin, he was former editor of Boxing Illustrated. The magazine had an article that said the fight may have taken place in Saskatoon and that it may have been reported in the Daily Eagle, December 11, 1921. the fight between 43-year-old Jack Johnson and 27-year-old Dempsey. Dempsey, of course, was in his prime. Now, according to the account, Dempsey wins with a KO in the 7th round. But rounds 1 through 5 and part of 6 were all Johnson. He was able to, according to the account, frustrate Dempsey, who could not maintain his famous crouch. Dempsey would be knocked down in the 5th. But in round 6, Dempsey takes over. He's working Johnson on the inside. He really rips his midsection. Johnson will double up, clinch, then he'll be knocked out by a Dempsey right hand to the jaw. Now let's look at the reasons why this might be true. Johnson needed money. He had just gotten out of Leavenworth. He was incarcerated for violating the Mann Act. He'd be pardoned, by the way, by a president very recently. President, you ready? Trump. So Johnson was doing exhibition fights, and some of those took place, we know, in Montreal, although it was in 1924. Dempsey, just months before, had fought George Carpentier in the first $1 Million Gate and didn't do much of anything except exhibitions for about a year and a half. And many of those were in Canada. The point here is both Johnson and Dempsey were available in December of 1921. Now, Dempsey said in his book after the Carpentier fight that he fought his exhibitions in France. He does not mention any fight with Jack Johnson. But it is a fact that fighting a private bout would allow him, Dempsey, to be able to avoid the tax burden of a big gate, the income tax having been instituted back in 1913. It's also true that Dempsey's manager, Doc Kearns, liked to gamble, and he had the connections where he could have arranged the bout. It's also a fact that keeping it secret made sense because of the racial climate. When Johnson beat Jim Jeffries, there was rioting and pillaging, and that would prove to be the last mixed fight with one exception. Johnson fought Jim Flynn in 1913. After that, Johnson would have to fight Jess Willard, to whom he lost the title, in Cuba. Another fact, Saskatoon would be an ideal place to have a secret fight. It was a mining town. It was isolated. Many people, both rich and poor, all of whom liked gambling. And there was little communication with the outside world. Something else. Organized boxing was new in 1920 and 21. There was only one official organization that recognized and ranked fighters, so there's very little oversight. Another fact, private fights were common in the 1920s in through the 1930s. You may remember a film called Hard Times. It was produced in the 1970s. It starred James Coburn and Charles Bronson. And both of these characters were close matches to Doc Kearns and Jack Dempsey. I'm going to show you a painting here by George Bellows. It's called Stag at Charkey's, and that's a private fight. It's also true that Jack Kearns' son said, and I'm using his words, the fight apparently happened. And then there's Jack Hay. Jack Hay claimed to be Dempsey's illegitimate son. He came out with a book, I don't think it was published, called A Pair of Jacks, meaning Jack Johnson and Jack Dempsey. Another fact. Neither Johnson nor Dempsey denied that this fight took place. And it is true that Johnson had been pressing for a fight after he got out of Leavenworth, a fight with Dempsey. And it's a fact also that after 1921, Johnson didn't mention it. It's also true that Dempsey was asked by Eskin, the former editor of several boxing magazines, about the fight. Did it take place? Dempsey replied in these words, "I always said I could beat Johnson." Then he asked Eskin not to run the story right now. Those were Dempsey's words. Eskin assumed by right now he meant, well, while Dempsey is alive. All right, those are the reasons why this fight may have taken place. Let's look at some others why it may not be true. There's a lot of vague wording. May have taken place, perhaps, this kind of thing. Nobody's got the proof. In fact, that eBay story apparently was offered some years ago. Nobody's seen it. Jack Kern's son used weasel words. I mentioned it before. He said the fight apparently happened. In other words, he knows no more than you and I do. Dempsey's alleged son offers no evidence. Something else to consider, why the fight did not take place. This would have been big news. Somebody like the Hearst or Pulitzer papers would have paid huge money to get this story. And if you have money-loving people in Saskatoon, they would be jumping over the border to tell the story, in my opinion. And why would this story appear in, of all places, the Brooklyn Eagle, a very obscure paper? Another reason why it did not take place. Though neither Johnson nor Dempsey denied it, neither one confirmed it, nor has anyone else that I know of associated with either fighter. Another reason why I think it's not true. I mentioned to you how the fight went. The first 5.5 rounds go for Johnson. Dempsey cannot figure out his style. Dempsey gets knocked down. Dempsey cannot assume his famous crouch. Then in the 7th round, Dempsey's working the body and he will knock out Johnson. This is a nearly exact copy of a fight that took place after Dempsey lost his title to Tunney. A 1927 bout with Jack Sharkey. You go read that account, and it reads exactly as did the, I think, made-up account of Johnson versus Dempsey. Another reason why I think it's not true. The Boston Eagle is online now. E.T. has been there. He's read the 21st or December 11, 21 issue and several others. Yes, they have a sports page with a lot of boxing. No mention of Dempsey versus Johnson. No mention of either fighter. It's possible that there was a supplement edition that did not get put online, but I doubt it. But the main reason why I think it did not happen is there's no way that somebody would not have gone to the press with that story. It would be worth, remember, this is the 1920s, it would be worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And another reason to consider, Jack Dempsey was at the height of his career. Jack Johnson, yes, he was 43, but with a style that would allow him to go on many rounds and a very difficult man to hit. What reason would Jack Dempsey have to risk his reputation, which, by the way, at that moment in 1921, he was attempting to rewrite? Why would he engage in a fight with somebody as dangerous as Jack Johnson? There's absolutely nothing to gain except some money, and he had already started making big cash. Well, that's pretty much it. That's E.T.'s take on it all. E.T. can be wrong. What do you think? Put in your comments below. Do subscribe to this channel if you've not done so. Do hit the like button. Mr. YouTube likes that and makes the videos more available. That's it. Thanks.